Hello, my friend. Welcome to day 4 of my flu, where I'm going to be doing my best to talk about the Trouble with Trudeau, 2019 Canadian Election Edition. This is a direct follow-up to my pretty popular 2017 video, The Trouble with Trudeau, as well as a secondary follow-up to my How Cucked is Canada videos from 2018. I recommend you watch at least the original Trouble with Trudeau, but if you really don't want to, here's the cliff notes. Trudeau won a majority government in 2015 based on his father's good name and a weak field of political opponents. While in office, he's made intersectionality his primary social focus, and globalist neoliberalism his primary economic focus. He played coy with the TPP on the campaign trail, knowing it was unpopular, then immediately climbed aboard after getting elected. He talks about SJW nonsense every single time he can shoehorn it in, all the while supporting cultural values within sub-communities that are fundamentally anti-Canadian, like, for example, Muslim segregation of the sexes. And, most importantly to me, he turned his back on one of the centerpieces of his campaign, electoral reform.
The commitment I made repeatedly and explicitly on electoral reform, I made because it really mattered to me. And it does really matter to me that we improve our democracy. And I know that there are a lot of people out there, actually the vast majority of Canadians who, yes, want to see us improve our democracy. I also know that it's really important that when it comes to changing our democracy, we do it right. Electoral reform, changing the way we vote, is a big change that will and could have far-reaching consequences for our country and needs to be taken very, very seriously. It's more than just who might win a few more seats in the next election. It goes to fundamentally how we operate, how we value, and how we hear diverse voices within our parliament. And for me, and I've been arguing this since long before I became leader, I always felt that we could make a clear improvement to our political process by offering people to not ever have to vote strategically again, to give a preference on your ballot, to rank your ballot. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people say it favors liberals. What it does is it favors parties who are good at reaching out to find common ground with broad groups of Canadians, to say, can I be your second choice? That's what it does. I think that's probably a good thing, but I've heard very clearly that people don't think that's a good thing. Or that they think it would favor liberals too much, and therefore I'm not going near it.
Here's Trudeau Meter. Remember this? This is a website that basically tracks Justin Trudeau's progress on all of the various campaign promises he made back in 2015. As you can see, out of the 230 distinct promises, he has 20 in progress, 143 achieved, and 67 broken. Now, if you look under the achieved ones, a lot of these are interesting. However, you'll notice that most of them have to do with spending, expanding spending programs, reinvesting in things. You know, good stuff generally. Then you go to broken. Check this out. A bunch of things for debt, a bunch of things for a balanced budget, a bunch of things for basically being fiscally responsible. Gone, broken, blown. But it's not just about the fact that he's broken some promises. Indeed, some of the goals he had set were things that I disagreed with, and so I'm happy he failed to meet them. Additionally, some of the goals he actually met, I think, were probably bad for Canada as well. It's not just that Trudeau's not doing what he said he'd do, it's that the things he wants to do, and the values that seem to lead him to those goals, are seriously out of whack. Firstly, there's the surface level stuff. All of the social justice junk. Forcing democratic quotas onto his cabinet at the expense of functionality.
Because it's 2015.
Virtue signaling about the climate, even though Canada's emissions are a drop in the bucket and are largely inconsequential on the world stage. Telling public services to end gendered terminology, like mother, father, Mr., and Mrs., in favor of gender-neutral language. There was even the whole Fisher people micro-scandal that I bet nobody outside of Canada even heard about.
Recently on a family vacation to Boston, I had a conversation with someone who would love, their fishermen would Fisher folks would love to have access to Europe like our Canadian fishermen do. Fisher folks do, excuse me. Fisher folks would love to have access to Europe like our Canadian fishermen do. Fisher folks do, excuse me.
I like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind.
This is minor stuff, though. Stupid, but minor. However, Trudeau's intersectionalist philosophy provides insight into his stance on immigration. For example, his Minister of Immigration, Ahmed Hassan, stated that 300,000 immigrants a year was to be the new normal for Canada in 2017. It's actually 350,000 now, by the way. He states that employers are asking the government to use immigration to meet their growth needs. This is one of the reasons I call Justin Trudeau a neoliberal globalist. When a country needs labor, that means the price of labor goes up. Companies operating in that country have to pay workers more than the bare minimum in order to be attractive. It's a market where the working class, not the company, holds the power to negotiate. Trudeau sees this and says, well, let's flood the Canadian worker market with hundreds of thousands of new workers, keeping the price of labor low and benefiting corporations. And since a lot of these workers have brown skin, we'll just call you racist or Islamophobic if you have any objections. Intersectional social justice and globalist capitalism have become these strange bedfellows, where their values and actions are largely aligned, and one of the best examples of this is in Justin Trudeau. But we've already seen what happens when the social justice left and the Islamic right align to reshape society. The Islamic right inevitably butchers their former allies on the left after taking power. We've seen this in Iran, Afghanistan, and other Middle Eastern nations that have turned into theocratic states. We see this happening piecemeal in Europe, with Sharia-enforced no-go zones in Britain, Germany, and Sweden. And those ex-Muslims fleeing oppression and coming to Canada, they're dismayed at what they see as the beginning of Islam's creeping rot over here.
Not accept refugees to care about these.
It's not about refugees. It's not about refugees. This right here is against Motion 103. Motion 103 doesn't clearly define Islamophobia. So we get into this territory of risking the potential for us to be able to freely express why we're against Islam as a religion, which is a set of ideas. That's the issue here. If I'm not able to,
You want to be able to
yes, you can. Of course, no, it's not hate speech. But being able to freely express why we're against certain religions and the ideals that they promote. That's the whole point.
has killed more Muslims.
You need to look at the wider societal context. Obviously, we're not trying to welcome in throwing homosexuals off buildings. That's obviously not the case.
But Sharia law, if you look at the punishment against engaging in homosexuality, is one of many, which is to throw someone off building, or to, for example, crucify them. In this country, and I'm appalled with that.
What does Trudeau say about this when he's asked? Nothing, really.
They want to install Sharia in Ontario. I mean, that's very recent. You can't be against that. You know very well that if the Sharia starts in Ontario, it'll start everywhere in Canada first. And second, women will go back 50 years. Like the time of our grandparents, the law in Canada, even in Ontario, is not the Sharia law and will not be the Sharia law, which is a Muslim law that some countries in the Middle East have, but Canada does not have it and will not have it. We have the same law that applies to everyone, and I'm very happy to be able to counter that falsehood that unfortunately is being communicated just about everywhere.
Yeah, to be honest, this is how Trudeau answers all of his questions. How will you prevent Sharia in Canada? It just won't happen, don't worry about it. Meanwhile, Trudeau's also stated that he will take refugees banned from the USA into Canada. You know, Justin, there's a lot of good reasons refugees might be banned from entering the States beyond just racism. They might actually be dangerous, you know? Brown people are capable of committing evil acts as well. There's been a strange shift in how we talk about Islam. When 9/11 happened, we recognized the threat of Islamic terrorism, while making sure to specify that not all Muslims were terrorists. But if 9/11 happened today, the media would say things like, we may never know the motive of the attackers, and you'd be called a bigot for bringing up Islam in the conversation. But okay, no Sharia in Canada, eh, Justin? How Canada barred adoptions from Muslim countries and used Sharia law to do it. The article states that even if an Islamic nation has approved an overseas adoption, Canadians would not be allowed to adopt, because adoption is not a legally recognized concept in Sharia law. Or about how Justin Trudeau wants to repatriate Canadian ISIS fighters back to Canada, stating that a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and that Canada should do what it can to bring Canadian nationals home to Canada, even if they've been fighting for ISIS. This is a position disagreed with by 71% of the electorate. We've already seen this policy in action. A Taliban fighter with Canadian citizenship, Omar Khadr, was kept in Guantanamo for years before being repatriated to Canada. Under Trudeau, he got a release from prison, $10.5 million from the government, and a formal apology. Jihadi Jack almost got a similar treatment before the Brits and Americans stopped it from happening. Trudeau's reasoning for doing all of this stuff can be seen in an interview he gave with CBC in 2016.
Canadians are quick to point out that ISIS is wrong, that Islam is not incompatible with a Western secular democracy, a free place but like on the Canada. Other hand, we need to make sure that we're working with communities like the Muslim community, for example, to demonstrate that that Islam is not incompatible with free and open Western society.
And I mean, fundamentally, he's right. Islam can certainly be compatible with Western secular democracy. Some Muslims are able to live in a secular society and not agitate for Sharia zones or a caliphate or whatever. There certainly exists lax Muslims, just like there exists lax Christians, who believe in a general sense but don't practice. But if you think the Sharia law types, the Islamists, the radicals are compatible with Canadian society, you're just wrong, and that's that. But because we're not allowed to have a distinction between a Muslim and an Islamist, if any objection to Islam is Islamophobia, if even just having the discussion makes us a bigot, well, then we're not able to draw a distinction between a refugee and a jihadi. They're all just people that Trudeau wants to bring to Canada. He doesn't recognize a difference between them.
I just want to know how your stance on ISIS is going to help Canadians in any way. I need to know how you're going to protect future Canadians like my young daughter and 10, 15, 20 years from now, when you're letting people in with an ideology that just does not conform to what we're doing here. So, I'd really like to know what your take on things.
Absolutely. No, I think that's gives me an opportunity to talk about first of all, the fact that one of the reasons Canada is successful as a country is because we have been open to people fleeing persecution, fleeing war zones, looking for a better life for themselves and their kids. That's been the story of this country from the time the first European settlers came to be received by Indigenous people. People were fleeing conflict, poverty, difficult situations, and came to Canada to build a better life for themselves. And successive waves of people have in every different time, and every different wave. And when we welcomed in waves of refugees, whether it was the Ismaili refugees in the early 70s, whether it was the Vietnamese boat people in the early 80s, whether it was people fleeing the devastation of the Second World War from Southern Europe in the 50s and 60s, the Italian communities, the Greek communities, the Portuguese communities, and others, our country is so much the better for it. And there is a sense at one point that, okay, maybe now that's enough. Maybe we have just about all the diversity we can handle and we shouldn't have any more. Well, I can tell you, when Italian families settled in Montreal in the post-war years, they faced terrible discrimination and people who pushed back at them and said, no, 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 you don't belong here, you don't speak English or French. Every wave of immigration has faced pushback because of...
Immigration worked well with past populations because they assimilated into Canada. Muslims are not assimilating into Canada. They want Sharia courts set up so they can handle their own affairs.
I'll tell you who wants to bring Sharia law. The Canadian government wants to bring Sharia law. And this is not a joke. Because Sharia law is simply the way Muslims do things. The Canadian government wanted the Muslims to be able to regulate their own issues of marriage and divorce and set up systems of mediation and arbitration to solve their problems amongst themselves through Sharia law, so that it's not a burden on the court system, which is already so bogged down. The Canadian government wanted people like myself to sign off on custody cases where there was an allegation of parental abduction to verify that is the parent who has taken the child off to that country, are they Islamically authorized to do so or not?
Which is entirely counter to the Canadian sensibility of equality under the law and universal human rights. Part of being Canadian is that you don't get to ghettoize yourselves into an isolated parallel power structure. The move to implement Sharia courts was rejected in the early 2000s, but under Trudeau the attempts have begun anew. I could go on all day about Islam in Canada. Maybe I will in another video. But let's move on to the defining scandal of Trudeau's term, and something people outside of Canada probably have never even heard of. SNC-Lavalin. When non-Canadian news outlets talk about SNC-Lavalin, they often say SNC-Lavalier. This is incorrect, but it seems to be a commonly made mistake. So if you happen to see it, just know that's what they're talking about. SNC-Lavalin is a Quebec-based engineering and construction company. The company was operating in Libya in 2008, where the then Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi, took a $2 million trip paid for by SNC-Lavalin. Further investigation by the RCMP led prosecutors to believe that SNC-Lavalin had been bribing Gaddafi to the tune of nearly $50 million. The court case moved slowly, and by the time Justin Trudeau took office in 2015, SNC-Lavalin lobbied his government to change the criminal code so they could avoid prosecution. In June of 2018, Trudeau's Liberals introduced an omnibus budget bill that quietly included amendments to the criminal code, basically allowing for companies in situations like SNC-Lavalin to receive minor penalties. The Liberals refused any attempt to split the budget bill from the criminal code amendments, and the objections were not widely reported on in the Canadian media. The Criminal Code Amendment gave the Crown prosecutors the power to offer a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, a DPA, to companies in SNC-Lavalin's position, in order to avoid a criminal prosecution, a public trial, and keep penalties low. In October of 2018, the Office of the Prime Minister began to pressure the Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to use her position to intervene in the SNC-Lavalin case and offer them a DPA. She refused, and in January of 2019, she was removed from her post and placed in the Ministry of Veterans Affairs instead. She would later resign from this post on February 11th. The Justice Committee of the House of Commons began a series of public hearings looking into the matter. During one of these hearings, Wilson-Raybould stated on February 27, 2019,
"For a period of approximately 4 months between September and December of 2018, I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as the Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin. These events involved 11 people, excluding myself and my political staff, from the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, and the Office of the Minister of Finance. This included in-person conversations, telephone calls, emails, and text messages. There were approximately 10 phone calls and 10 meetings specifically about SNC, and I and/or my staff were a part of these meetings. Within these conversations, there were expressed statements regarding the necessity of interference in the SNC-Lavalin matter, the potential of consequences, and veiled threats if a DPA was not made available to SNC. These conversations culminated in December the 19th of 2018 with a conversation I had with the clerk of the Privy Council, a conversation that I will provide some significant detail on. A few weeks later, on January the 7th, 2019, I was informed by the Prime Minister that I was being shuffled out of the role of Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
She provided details of events, dates of meetings, and named a handful of specific people within the Minister of Finance's office, the Prime Minister's office, and Trudeau himself as individuals who put pressure on her to cut SNC-Lavalin a deal. She also provided a phone call, secretly recorded by her, of her conversation with the clerk of the Privy Council that took place on December 19th, 2018. In that call, she was told that Trudeau wanted a DPA for SNC-Lavalin one way or another. Throughout all of these proceedings, Trudeau had been denying everything, thanking Wilson-Raybould for her hard work. You know, playing politics and keeping his mouth shut. As details came to light, though, there were calls for further investigation by Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party, and Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservatives, wanted Trudeau's resignation. Trudeau responded by having his lawyer send a letter to Scheer threatening a libel suit.
I think it's important that all politicians
be straight with Canadians in how they characterize their own actions and their own beliefs. I think we're going to have an election in the coming months. You can't be inventing things. You can't be lying to Canadians.
Holy shit, dude, you're gonna sue your political opponent for talking smack? Scheer's response, naturally, was "do it, faggot," and it was quietly dropped. In any case, Trudeau expelled Wilson-Raybould from the Liberal Party. Since then, the RCMP's begun a formal investigation into Trudeau's actions, as well as the actions of the other people named, which is currently ongoing. Wilson-Raybould was interviewed by investigators on September 10th, 2019, the same day that the Globe and Mail published a story stating that the Trudeau government was failing to cooperate with the RCMP's inquiry by not allowing them access to staffers or materials. This is a scandal that has haunted Justin Trudeau for the past 9 months. He kept his mouth shut, which is the right thing to do if no new information comes out. But unfortunately for him, new information kept coming out, and Trudeau had to keep addressing and readdressing the situation every few months, altering his story bit by bit in order to fit the latest leak. You have to ask, though, why did Trudeau go along with it? Well, when he was asked to explain a small portion of that Gaddafi money, just $30,000 of it meant to procure Canadian prostitutes for Gaddafi's son, Trudeau said it was to protect Canadian jobs.
This is what SNC's intervention looked like. $30,000 worth of Canadian prostitutes given to Muammar Gaddafi's son. This is the so-called victimless crime that our woke, feminist Prime Minister is moving mountains to cover up. When did the Prime Minister learn that SNC-Lavalin paid for prostitutes for Muammar Gaddafi's son?
Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, we will stand up for Canadian workers. We will stand up for good jobs right across this country. We will do so in a way that is consistent with our values, with our expectations, and with the rule of law. That is the matter that we will stay focused on in this. We will defend Canadian jobs, and we will ensure that we're being consistent both with our values and with the rules and laws in place.
Yeah, that's right. SNC-Lavalin is not only a company that works globally, but also domestically. From Trudeau's point of view, making sure SNC-Lavalin stayed afloat, even as they were complicit in human rights abuses, meant that more people in Canada stayed employed. Globalists, man, not even fucking once. Trudeau talks about women's rights at home, about LGBT rights, about all of this progressive shit. But when it comes to abroad, where people are actually suffering, no, he's happy to cuddle up to the worst dictators around. As we've seen, Gaddafi was no problem. We already know how much the Trudeau family loves Cuba's Castro family. He complains about human rights in Saudi Arabia, then turns around to sell them Canadian weapons. He's been remarkably silent on China, drawing the ire of both the pro-CCP and pro-freedom camps. And while Islam might be full of sexism, since it's a part of a beautiful non-white culture, Trudeau would just be a bigot to object. It's no wonder there's been memes of him dressing up in the cultural garb of every nation imaginable. Trudeau wants to pander to all of them but Canada. And I think it's pretty obvious why. I don't think Trudeau believes in Canada as a nation. There's been a wave of articles and opinion pieces talking about how Canada isn't real during his term. Trudeau himself has stated that Canada has no core identity and instead exists as a post-national state. Trudeau talks about wanting to continue to change what it means to be Canadian to include more things, as he did during the English-speaking debate. But, as always, there is a core Canadianness. There is a core Canadian culture that must necessarily exclude some stuff. Not everything alien to Canada can be brought under the umbrella of what it means to be Canadian. But if you bring this up, Trudeau believes that you need to be closely monitored. He'd never dare say this in English, so here he is stating it during a French-language interview.
Au Canada, dans 4 villes, il y a eu des manifestants avec des dossards jaunes aussi qui manifestaient contre la fameuse taxe carbone qui a été présentée il n'y a pas si longtemps et aussi l'immigration. Est-ce que ça vous inquiète de voir un début de mouvement comme celui-là dans certaines villes canadiennes?
Ben, je trouve que les politiciens conservateurs ont vraiment joué pour alimenter une approche qui se désengage surtout par rapport à l'environnement. Ici, au Québec, il y a un consensus sur l'environnement, mais il faudrait demander aux 11 députés conservateurs du Québec C'est quoi leur plan?
Vous pensez que les conservateurs sont derrière les Gilets jaunes dans ces
Je
jeux-là?
pense que les conservateurs sont en train de jouer des jeux dangereux par rapport à alimenter cette controverse. On a vu ça aussi avec le compact global sur l'immigration. Andrew Scheer qui est en train de dire « Ah non, on va perdre notre souveraineté ». Ça n'a rien à voir avec ça, mais il est en train de faire de la mésinformation assez agressive. Puis c'est dangereux dans une société quand on commence à jouer sur les émotions et qu'on laisse tomber les faits.
Donc, vous ne croyez pas que ce mouvement-là va prendre de l'ampleur dans d'autres villes canadiennes pour l'instant?
Je sais que la grande majorité des Canadiens savent qu'on doit agir sur l'environnement et ils savent que l'immigration est une source de croissance économique pour notre pays et non de faiblesse. Pour la majorité des gens, c'est ça. Mais il y a une minorité qui se fait de plus en plus vocale qui va falloir surveiller.
In fact, Trudeau does a lot of stuff in French, thinking that he'll get away with it in the eyes of the English majority. Like labeling a French woman who yelled at him about his immigration policy a hateful person who has no place in Canada, then standing by while the crowd turns on her and assaults her.
Moi, je veux savoir quand vous allez nous remettre le 146 millions qu'on a payé pour vos immigrants illégaux.
OK. Madame.
C'est nous autres qui avons payé pour ça.
Intolérance par rapport aux immigrants, ça n'a pas sa place au Canada. C'est intolérance par rapport aux immigrants.
Hey, Trudeau! Hey, monsieur Trudeau!
Madame, votre intolérance n'a pas sa place ici. Nous sommes libéraux.
Êtes-vous tolérant avec les Québécois de souche? Êtes-vous tolérant avec les Québécois de souche? Répondez-moi, vous non plus, vous n'avez pas votre place au Québec. Avez-vous compris?
Non, j'en ai pas. Vous allez venir avec moi?
Non.
OK. Là, vous allez venir avec moi maintenant.
Regardez.
Lâche-moi, tu me fais mal, mes os ils cassent, je fais de l'ostéoporose.
Non, regardez.
Lâche-moi, là. Regarde, je vais être bien.
Elle menace pas personne. Elle menace pas personne.
J'ai pas menacé
Elle a juste voulu parler.
J'ai le droit de dire mon opinion à M. Trudeau. Fait que lâche-moi. As-tu compris? Tu me lâches.
Vous avez aucune autorité pour tenir cette madame-là. Vous avez aucune autorité.
There's also just a lot of stupid stuff Trudeau's done over the years. His fake eyebrow slipping off during an interview because, what the hell, why, Justin? His blackface photo, which Trudeau had to sincerely apologize for, and then re-apologize for, as more photos and even video began to surface of him doing it multiple times. Also really weird was that the Toronto Star came out to defend Trudeau by saying blackface is as Canadian as hockey. Fucking what? Or journalists being banned from covering Trudeau's events under the guise of not being an accredited journalist, even though Canada is not a nation that licenses its journalists. Or when masked Antifa goons harassed an elderly couple, and the internet identified one of them as Allah Al-Sofi, and as a consequence, the Al-Sofi family had to close their restaurant. Justin Trudeau was one of the people who came out in support of this innocent, blameless refugee. Or when Justin Trudeau blasted Trump for his family separation policy for illegal immigrants when Canada does the same damn thing. Or how about that time when he was asked what he personally does to help the environment, and he basically fell all over himself?
We have recently switched to drinking water bottles out of water out of when we have water bottles out of plastic. Away from plastic towards paper. Like drink box water bottles sort of things.
Yeah, there's been a lot of little missteps that have kind of shown Justin Trudeau to not exactly be on the ball all the time. Like there are some things that he should really, really know that he just doesn't. He's a high school drama teacher, not a world leader. Do you want to end this video with a Me Too accusation? Because I kind of want to end it with a Me Too accusation. Justin Trudeau was accused of groping a reporter at a music festival in 2000. The incident allegedly took place when Trudeau was 28. The Prime Minister's press secretary told BuzzFeed News he doesn't recall any negative interactions. This is the world you wanted, Justin. This is where all the feminist, intersectional, believe women bullshit leads you. But this is an old article from last year. How about something newer? You know that infamous blackface photo of Trudeau? That was taken at West Point Grey Academy, where Trudeau was a teacher. He left that job, but has never given a consistent reason as to why. The Ottawa Citizen reported in 2001 that he was leaving to start a public speaking career. The Montreal Gazette reported he was leaving to teach at a public school. In 2014, Trudeau's autobiography states that he left due to a dispute with the administration over an article written in the school's newspaper. In 2015, the Vancouver Sun reported Trudeau left the school in a dispute over school dress code and other values. On October 4th, 2019, Trudeau himself stated that he left because he was just moving on with his life. The former headmaster of the school has stated the reason that he was given was that Trudeau was leaving to be an engineer. There's murmurings that the October 5th edition of the Globe and Mail was supposed to contain the real reason Trudeau left the school, a sexual assault claim. But the story was pulled last minute. Trudeau's accuser was a student at West Point Grey when Trudeau was a teacher. And the reason the article was pulled is because she's being offered a big fat check to stay quiet, lest the whole thing tank Trudeau's political career. This was last reported on October 7th, so either she took the money and ran, or the media has quietly buried the whole story. Probably both. I think Trudeau's scared of losing the election. His first term as Prime Minister has been a complete shitshow, so frankly, he should be scared. I think that's why he asked Obama, a non-Canadian, for an endorsement. No, wait. Trudeau refused to answer the question of whether or not Obama gave him the endorsement willingly or was asked by the Liberal campaign. Well, frankly, I don't care. Fuck your globalism. Obama's not Canadian. He has no place endorsing anyone in the Canadian elections. Tomorrow's election day. I'm going to be doing a special stream where we cover the election results live. Personally, I plan to vote for the local candidate of Maxime Bernier's party, the PPC. However, I think he might actually not have one running in my riding. If that's the case, I will be voting Conservative for the first time in my life.
Then the ethics commissioner found him guilty of breaking ethics laws not once, but twice. And he still won't let the RCMP investigate the SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal. And that's why when we form government, I will hold a judicial inquiry into his scandal to get to the bottom of what he's done.
And it's not out of any great love of the Conservative Party or Andrew Scheer either. Scheer is not perfect. He's lied. He's been hypocritical, just like Trudeau has. But if I can't vote PPC, I will vote Conservative because in terms of policy, Scheer is better than the NDP or the Greens.
You would not respect a, if Andrew Scheer wins the most seats, you would not allow him to form government. You would oppose that.
We don't respect Conservatives now.
And in terms of sanity, he's better than Trudeau. Trudeau is cut from the same cloth as all of the other globalist neoliberal rot that's been corrupting Western democracies for decades now. He might have a splash of social justice paint over top, much like Hillary Clinton took on during the 2016 election. But in the end, I think Trudeau is bad for Canada. Socially, an SJW, economically, a globalist, nationally, a disaster, and internationally, a laughingstock. I'm going to end this video with an advertisement that Canada's tax-funded public broadcaster, the CBC, refused to run. It is a campaign ad made by the Conservatives, and it's designed to make Justin Trudeau look pretty bad. That's what a lot of campaign ads are. It's not exactly foul play. However, at the 11th hour, the election's tomorrow, the CBC is banning Conservative ads like these ones. And I don't know about you, but I think that the CBC, being publicly funded, has an obligation to remain politically neutral. So here's the ad in all of its glory. I'll talk to you guys later. I love you.
What's the difference between running with a record now and running in 2015? Well, what I can say now is look at what we've done.
It's become the billion-dollar question. How big will the federal deficit be? The deficit could rise above $20 billion.
Today, a ruling came down that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has broken several conflict of interest rules.
The Prime Minister broke the law in 4 different places, and that's just talking about the Conflict of Interest Act.
Why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups? Because they're asking for more than we are able to give right now. The fact is, we work we're just trying to reorder the thoughts.
$12 million to install energy-efficient refrigerators for a corporation that made $800 million last year. owned by the Westons, one of Canada's richest families worth $13.5 billion.
My question is, why does it have to be done with taxpayer dollars? Why do we have to fork out $12 million to help Loblaws?
Gerald Butts and Katie Telford had in total received over $200,000 in moving expenses.
Liberals have apologized and paid more than $10 million to Omar Khadr, a payout which has divided Canadians right across the country.
It's the first foreign trip Trudeau will come back from with his image tarnished.
Trudeau's visit to India has been a colossal failure.
SNC-Lavalin is in the middle of a legal fight of its own.
I experienced a consistent and sustained effort to politically interfere.
The allegations are false.
This is not the first time the Prime Minister has been found to have contravened the Conflict of Interest Act.
What I can say now is, look at what we've done.